I'm delighted that we are going to have our good colleague, Dr. Martin Frick, who is the Director of World Food Program at in Berlin. And Martin, you've got the big view. Tell us what we need to look forward to.
Well, Constance, thank you very much for the invitation, also to Patrick. A great pleasure to be here. Let me maybe start with the previous life in which I was the deputy to the UN Food Systems Summit. And when that process started, the Secretary General in 2019 said, our food systems are broken, and that was raising some eyebrows because at that time it didn't look that broken. There was COVID, of course, and COVID has placed an enormous burden on people worldwide. But it's really the last year now and a little bit more where we see the global food crisis exploding. It's worthwhile recalling that by 2015, the numbers had been constantly going down to a point that the world community agreed on SDG 2, maybe the most historic and the most underreported of all the SDGs, abolishing hunger. Now, at that stage now, it doesn't look like we are succeeding. 2019, we had 135 million people acutely threatened by hunger. The number of chronically hungry people is much higher, but 135 million in such dire need that organizations such as the World Food Program need to come to the rescue. Today, that number is 345 million. And already last December, we had 276 million. We spoke about the biggest crisis since Second World War, and that was before Russia invaded Ukraine, putting oil in the fire. So what has that to do with holistic grazing? Well, the world, because we are currently most concerned about the situation in the Horn of Africa. And, you know, I want to give you a data point that's maybe interesting. Somalia is the place where we are highly concerned about people sliding all the way into IPC 5. That's our lingo for famine, the worst condition in food insecurity. But still, we are handing out 93% of the funding we are having, not in food, but in cash transfers. So when you have money, there is still the possibility to buy on the local market. And what does that mean? It means in places like northern Kenya, Senegal, that people are depending on cattle, and that cattle is the life stream of these places. Just yesterday, we had a great conversation here in Berlin, conference on climate and security, where we had a specific focus on Eastern Africa. And a lady from the area came up and said, I don't understand all this debate about veganism in rich countries. That doesn't work with us. And I think the first bit that we need to unpack is, yes, meat and animal protein consumption is a huge problem globally, but it is a rich country's problem. And in poor countries, we have an underconsumption, not an overconsumption of animal protein. And then the second bit, and I've heard a little bit what Chris said and Nicholas and Anna before, it is the constant need to remind people that reality is not happening in silos. Yes, holistic grazing is a climate solution. Of course it is. It's also a biodiversity solution, but it won't work until empowerment of local communities becomes a reality. It needs gender support. It needs all of the above. And so what I so often witness is that we have a general situation on the ground in which everything is dependent from anything. But then you have on the government level fragmentation. You got ministries of line responsible for only that or only that. And I think the big challenge is to bring it together. And, you know, holistic grazing is a wonderful example for that. I think Nicholas mentioned that bit of Wild West situation that we are having on voluntary carbon offsets. And that is so unfortunate, and it points to a fundamental failure of the UN climate process, in which basically everything was negotiated with the exception of a global price on carbon and payments and methodology for that. So we have to come through the back door. And I think a very promising way is to go to donors. And I can report to you from Berlin about the situation with Germany, which is quite encouraging, and saying, look, maybe we cannot quantify to the last gram the carbon benefit, and maybe it's fluctuating over the season. But there is absolutely no doubt that a responsible management of the land is exactly what is needed to address all the multiple crises. And, when we are running out of taxpayer money from rich countries, when we are speaking about things such as climate justice, when we want longer-term food security in places like Eastern Africa, we need to look at the entire systems. And animals have been a part of that system for centuries. They need to be an integral part of it. And it's in the synergies of the grazing method. And I think, a previous speaker was emphasizing on silvopastoral system, agroforestry. We have to bring all of these different issues together to solve the multiple crises we are having. And in that, grazing is an integral part, and managing it right is maybe the biggest contribution, not only in Eastern Africa, but all in the Sahel region, for creating peace and stability, if we manage to restore the traditional synergies between pastoralists and farmers. And Constance, let me stop here. I hope I hear more from you, and I'm very encouraged to see how the topic is getting more traction in international fora as well.
Thank you, Martin. That's absolutely delightful. I must say I'm particularly encouraged by the fact that as a high representative of the UN system, and as FIDA, another representative of the UN system, we see that the global community of states is beginning to move in the direction of recognizing the ecosystem services that grazing produces. And I hope that this will in turn help those of us who worry about the conflict systems like Bernard or Mr. Bukhari to facilitate the jobs that they have in making these landscapes work better.